Hello everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH3022. Hope you have settled in after your first week. We've got a lecture planned this week, which will hopefully inform us in terms of our key ideas for our methodology for our projects and our research that we're going to do on this module. I've produced in this video I'll just cover the kind of key topics of what the lecture's about. And how we'll approach things and how we'll follow that up in the workshops. I've produced the PowerPoint presentation. I don't share the PowerPoint presentation itself, but I do have printed notes which are available via the DMU Commons wiki on the TECH3022 page. Any diagrams, links, that kind of thing are included in these notes as well. And it's just in a format that's more digestible because it's based on reading rather than just looking at clip art pictures that I've pulled off the internet, which are fairly useless. So there you go. The topic this week is symbolic interactionism, and this is an approach to thinking about communications and media, which is certainly in the UK isn't particularly very fashionable. It hasn't been. It isn't really included in the media studies curriculum, and yet actually it has huge potential, and particularly I think it has potential within the study of social media, because it's founded on on the idea that we co-create and negotiate our meanings and our understandings of the world on the basis of the potential that those meanings and gestures have to further our lines of action, so we move forward with things. It's a sense of understanding. So what I want to do is run through some of the kind of background core ideas about symbolic interactionism. What I've done is earlier in the year I wrote a background document for some research about symbolic interactionism, so I've printed this off. It's available on the wiki as well, but it's a fairly dense summary of the core ideas of symbolic interactionism. I'll give you a copy of this which you can read at your leisure, and we can maybe use as the basis for some conversation and discussion, but what we'll do in the lecture is we'll kind of summarise those topics and we'll look at them in kind of key issues, and then we'll have a follow-on conversation in the workshop. So the idea is really thinking what we're trying to do with this module is we're trying to situate our experience and use of social media in relation to the processed food culture, if you like, so argument. So this is a way of thinking sociologically about our media. So we're not viewing media as merely as a set of institutions or as texts or as technical practices, but we're looking at it in the context of how do people use this. And if you think about, if you remember back, if you've heard this adage before, the Marshall McLuhan idea that the medium is the message. Well, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to push that even further forward, and we're saying the mediators are the message. So the people that use media, that's what we need to be focusing on, and that's why I think symbolic interactionism gives us a sense to look at what motivates people and what drives people to share and collaborate and exchange. Why do some people find things funny and other people don't? What's the context for these things? Kind of how do they, we looked at in the past, we've looked at the idea of spreadable media. How does media spread? Well, it spreads because people find it meaningful, and they spread it because they think that other people will find it meaningful, and it kind of almost takes on a life of its own, but it's not. It's in kind of, we use the metaphor of the virus a lot, kind of it's viral, like it's an infection, but actually that's a very negative way of thinking about media, because it doesn't suggest that any of us are kind of awake to this. It's art, we kind of get infected by accident, unbeknownst to us. We eat something, or we stand next to somebody on a train and we get infected with their diseases and germs, and media is not like that. Media is creative, it's positive, it's about people affirming their sense of their place in the world, and it's about sharing what they're potentially, the positive side is what they're engaged with. So it kind of, how do we define community life through this process, and what the kind of human experiences are that are being shared and exchanged. And so what we want to use this as is a kind of technique for investigation. And we'll follow this up. There's kind of some methodological issues in terms of how we gather information and data, both in real life and online. But if we understand that what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how is it that people understand things and mean things. What is it that and we have to work with people quite intimately and quite closely to do that. So there's a kind of set of processes that are taking place. I'm going to draw on the work of particularly of a guy called Robert Pruss, although in the handouts there's a lot more background reading from the main advocate of symbolic interactionism is a guy called Herbert Bloom, who kind of writing in the 1930s, died in the 80s, I think he died. So, but in the 1960s he was active. So, how do things gather meaning? How are things shared? How are things exchanged? And what kind of techniques of investigation do we need to think about using and adopting in order to be able to make sense of these things? So, just one of the things is when you enter a new chat forum, for example. How do you get a perspective on what's going on? How do you make sense of things that are happening in that forum? How do you know what to say? How do you know what the tenor of the conversation is? How do you know what the subjects of interest are? How do you know that you've been rebuffed by other people or you're being ignored? Or how do you play an active participative role within that virtual community? Well, it's all learnt experience, and we learn from each other, and we learn through the mediation process, through language, through signs, through images, through texts. So it's a really kind of creative approach, and it implies that we kind of are all active media producers, mediators in this process. Some may be more effective than others. Some may be more dominant than others. Some from a traditional approach which have the assumed right to manage the message, and others who are subordinate to that. But these things can change. These things aren't fixed. They kind of get reshaped, and as we introduce new media technologies and new platforms and new capability for sharing different types of media, these things change. So how do we account for change? So the notes are up on the wiki. The workshops will cover, what are we doing in the workshops? We're going to do an investigation. We'll look in more detail at the first piece of coursework, and we want to start to look for some campaign issues about, I've got some examples there for us to look at, just a couple, and I want you to build up investigate your own examples of campaigns based around for and against sugar. So the sugar tax campaigns and the anti-sugar campaigns are about there. Let's see if we can build up a kind of a really detailed picture of what kind of campaigns are out there and how they work, how they use media, how effective they are. Anyway, I've gone on far too long, so I'll see you at the lecture and the workshops on Monday.